Wow.
Yeah, good call. Good idea. Extra credit. Okay, here we go. Nope, wrong slide. Okay, here we go for reals. Okay, so this is a sim. Took some time, anonymizing it. This is an actual real company that we evaluated. So the cool thing is our CFO, Elena, is going to lecture tomorrow, and then she's going to talk about, our thinking process behind it. And you can actually match it with, some of the research that we did and some of the feedback that we actually got from real PE and VC investors that are part of our cap table, which I thought would be a pretty interesting exercise. So as you can see here, typically, this is this was introduced by one of the biggest banks of Canada. I'm not going to say the name. If you guys were really clever enough, you guys figured it out which bank it was. But it was a smaller company, rather, because normally they do deals around like the 50, well, like 30 to 50 million range. But this was like a smidge below that. And normally, when you're looking at a SIM, they're going to give you like an executive summary, key investment highlights, overview of the product. Yeah, Ahmad, you want to mute yourself? All right, I just muted him. And then the business model overview, financials, growth rate, industry overview, certain trends, etc. Um, competitors, team, structure, it could be all sorts of stuff. But the idea is basically it's a teaser so that investment bankers, PE firms could actually get you hooked, right, as a potential buyer of the company. That's the idea behind it. So normally you'll sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and then you'll start, digging into all this stuff to look into the numbers. Now, normally when you're assessing a value of a company, you'll look at anywhere from like 3 to 5 years, ideally 5 years. But sometimes, you might only get access to 2 years for whatever reason, right? But before you dive into this, the reason why they set this up is to, kind of like anonymize the deal a little bit and then trying to assess your interest before, opening up everything possible. So just based off of the sim, like, what does this company do? Do you guys have an idea? Were you guys able to figure out what the company does? How do they make money? What are their core products? Um, what are some things that you guys found that you liked or disliked about this particular company? Yeah,
So,
like,
so basically, they are targeting for-profit school, and their product is basically a cloud-based digital platform that has all these additional functions depending on how much the school is willing to pay, and it's more of like a all-in-one ease of access that allows them to both attract and retain students, I guess.
yeah, that is correct. Does anyone understand if what we mean by like cloud-based digital software? Right, it's basically sits on the cloud, like AWS server, right? And then it's software focused. You don't like build hardware and go to the site and build something. It's actually sits on the cloud, kind of like how things sit on Google Drive or Dropbox or something like that. So think about it, as that in terms of like its characteristics. And yeah, does this kind of resemble any kind of business that you guys are familiar with by any chance? Yeah. Does Salesforce ring a bell, or Pipedrive? Right. So what I noticed immediately from this sim was that this seemed to be kind of like a Salesforce, but for schools, right? Salesforce, but for schools. And knowing that, like, if you knew that, like, what are some of the questions that could potentially arise from that? If you're looking at this, like, what's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind? Logan.
Why haven't they expanded into other industries outside of education?
Okay, so yeah, expanding into different verticals, that could be correct. But what about the reverse? What about Salesforce entering here, or HubSpot? right? If they were to copy this model, how easy it would be, right? What are some other thoughts that might come to mind?
I was wondering about how well it would integrate with other software too that the schools use.
Oh, the integration component. Why is that important if you're assessing a value of a company, Vince?
Well, all those, I mean, Salesforce, for example, all these larger entities too, they're going to be able to make sure their product integrates really well with, other competitors and everything. And they seemed a little bit smaller on that side of things. So that was why I was a little concerned about that. But yeah, for the schools admissions, besides just, their marketing platform and everything, I'm sure they have, I mean, I don't really know what they use, but yeah, I'm sure they have a lot of other technologies.
How does that impact, the financials if it's deeply integrated, Vince?
They should be able. I would think they'd be able to get more. I mean, revenue. I'm not sure really.
More revenue, right? But what kind of revenue?
Like from partnerships from with other services and everything. I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's think about the quality of the revenue, right? So let's say you're Chapman University, right? And all of a sudden you decide to partner with this company, company X, right? And then you have to integrate this with Canvas. You need to integrate this with, I don't know, Blackboard as well, because some of the teachers are using Blackboard. You have to integrate it with I don't know, maybe like you also have some kind of like marketing tool that you do, like HubSpot, maybe to do some digital marketing for SEO, SEM. Will Canvas or will Chapman University, will it be more likely to stay using this service or less likely with, the more services it's integrated into?
Yeah, they'd stay for a lot longer for sure.
Right.
It's
So
deeply rooted. Yeah.
exactly. So the switching cost, right? And what is switching cost, guys? Yeah, lie.
How much it would cost to switch from one competitor to the other?
Does it necessarily just mean financial cost?
No, it could be time, it could be opportunity cost.
Any kind of overhead, right? Training, time, resources, the ramp up time, right? Training. So anytime a software is deeply integrated with so many different like modules and platforms, etc., always a huge plus because it means the quality of the revenue goes up because there's a high switching cost. It costs the customers a lot of effort, to actually make that switch. So sometimes that's why you see like legacy software for like 20 years that people just stick it, like Blackboard, right? We didn't change over from Blackboard to Canvas until like last year because I'm sure a lot of professors probably resisted. They're like, no, I'm not switching. I'm going to retire in like 2 years. Why the hell do I want to switch and learn something new? I'm sure that was probably a debate at some point. Hence the reason why, switching costs is a huge factor, right? So if the quality of the revenue is good, what happens? What happens to the valuation of the company? Goes up? Why would it go up? Because the quality of the revenue is good, right? There's no real reason behind it. You want sticky, consistent revenue, right? That is not up and down, etc. What are some other thoughts that come to mind? Like, what did you guys think about the presentation here? How the bankers presented this as, for example, there was a page that I really wasn't enthused about, and I'll go to that page right now. What did you guys think about this page? Is this accurate? Do you guys feel like this page is accurate? Yes, no.
No,
Why?
because it's a guesstimate and they're trying to sell you on their product, so they're gonna, make as big of a reasonable guess as they can for what the market size is going to be. I'm sure they have valuation techniques, but
But it's education, it's ed tech. Isn't it correct? Logan, you don't think it's correct?
I don't think so. Personally.
Okay, any other thoughts?
Does it only reflect a well, I thought it was probably correct. I didn't have an issue with the page, but are they only targeting a very small segment within ed tech? Or
Yes,
yeah.
Vince, that is correct. Imagine you just put like education and it's like a $70 trillion industry and you're trying to sell it to a seller like, dude, what the hell is this? Like, did your summer interns make this? Like, I'd be so pissed. So the joke was like, yeah, they probably brought their, C team, right? Their not so great team to build this page because I want to know specifically the size of enrollment software, like student enrollment software. That's what I want to know the size of, because by saying this means ed tech, it means it could compete against Canvas, it could compete against Blackboard, it could compete against any kind of learning management software, all these different avenues, right? So you can't argue this is a $7 trillion opportunity. There's no freaking way, right? You're only like exactly like what Vince said, it's only a small fraction of a giant industry. So this was the problem I had with this page. I really didn't like it or appreciated it. But when you're looking at this, no matter, even if Goldman Sachs has their logo stamped here, you have to be very, very skeptical, because at the end of the day, they're trying to sell you something in these types of scenarios. Does that make sense? What do you guys think about the CAGR? Do you guys like the CAGR?
It was a little off for me because if you go up a little bit
Mm-hmm.
for the ed tech market size, oh no, go back to the page with this page. So it's 18.1% compound annual growth rate for ed tech, but then the 3.9% for global education and training. So like the gap between like,
Yeah, it's super inconsistent. I didn't even notice that. Yeah, this is 18.1. This is 3.9.
3.9.
And yeah, because CAGR is compound annual growth rate, but they just added that. So that's completely off. That is correct. But yeah, so a couple things that I didn't like. Also, the churn was incorrect. There's one page on like page, I think 9, and then page like 36 that was completely off. What did you guys think about the software, the user UI, user interface in general?
I thought it looked a lot like Microsoft Word document with the blues on the left.
That's
Then,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, we could have built this off of Microsoft, Word document, right? Were you guys impressed with the revenue size and the financials? What did you guys think about the financials?
I was actually pretty impressed with the financials, especially their reoccurring payments. I was like, it goes increased year after year, and including their retention rate was pretty good too.
What are some of the things that stood out? Like, what are some likes and dislikes about this that you guys noticed, that you guys might have been worried about, not worried about?
Like
I
that.
don't.
Go for it, my man. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say I don't think it's on this page, but I noticed they paid more taxes in the last year than did the other years.
Mm-hmm. What else?
I was going to say I like that their net income effectively doubled in the span of 3 years.
Yep, I like that too. Did you guys notice the revenue that was pretty stable, 2019 and 2020, despite doing some, I guess like accounting gymnastics potentially, in terms of like bad debt expense. It wasn't too far off, but the adjusted EBITDA margins are growing, right? So it means that they're likely moving more and more into tech, which is always a really, really good sign. What else? Revenue's been pretty solid. Are you guys familiar with the rule of 40 for software? Okay. If you take the growth rate and then the adjusted EBITDA margin, and then if it equals 40, it means it's growing at a pretty decent rate. It's VC fundable. That's kind of like the mantra behind that. So if you add 24 plus, EBITDA margin of 41, that's 65. You take -2 and 34, that gives you 32. And then you take 11 and 23, it takes you 34. And then 23 and 28 gives you 51. So they're consistently hovering around the rule of 40, which is pretty good. They are potentially fundable despite their software not being, I guess, like super high tech at the moment. So it's pretty interesting. COGS is going down, right? Gross margin profits are increasing. So some of the top line stuff, looks pretty good. You'll notice that, in different pages, like there's like dividends that they paid out to. That was probably not good because it means like, they're paying themselves when they could be reinvesting in the business. But right here, you can see dividends declared. So they pay themselves quite a bit in the year 2020. This is below the EBITDA amount, but nonetheless, it's like, well, maybe you should be growing your business. However, certain businesses are not meant to be $100 million, right? Sometimes some businesses are just meant to be a lifestyle business. And I know for some of you guys, prefer to do a lifestyle business. There's no reason to hit home runs where you can, have a much easier lifestyle, just having more of a work-life balance type of thing. So, sometimes just the numbers themselves can really kind of paint a picture of what kind of company that this potentially is. Any questions about the sim? Okay, let's go ahead and talk about ARK Invest. Let me see here. I'll just pull up the website. Now, did you guys know about ARK Invest before this class, or was this new? Tell me if it was new the first time. Yeah, okay. Most of you guys, okay, cool. So I'll pull up ARK right here. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so what do you guys think in terms of like the videos and some of the material on the website? Especially compared to some of the traditional hedge funds, money managers, etc. What were some of the things that popped into your mind?
It was an interesting approach that they primarily, at least from what I saw, invested in companies that they think would genuinely disrupt like the status quo of traditional industries.
Yeah,
rather than investing for pure profit. Sorry, my bad.
No worries. I mean, does that sound like something that Goldman Sachs does, or
Not at all.
Probably not, right? Any other thoughts?
I thought it was interesting how the website says, Catherine Woods mentioned how other companies are focusing on the past and with benchmarks to see what has worked in the past. They're more focused on what's going to work in the future and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. She is so brilliant, and I can't believe she became famous before I could like get her to speak at Chapman and some of these other places. Any other thoughts?
It was interesting that they're so diversified, although that they're like investing and like researching about blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotics, a lot of areas. It was like really interesting for me.
Yeah. Did you guys check out the research center and all this stuff? Like, what kind of finance company like puts all their data out there? It's incredible. Like, no one really does that. No VC, PE firms, no way. I mean, it's amazing how she's just sharing all this information and the culture that they have. I'm just so impressed with that type of approach. You guys should look for jobs let's see if there's any jobs here. You guys should definitely apply. Asian innovation, like we got some people in Asia. Associate analytics, analyst, genomics. Yeah, you guys should apply here for sure. And then yeah, if you guys get an interview, I will like train you up like crazy, just to make sure, just to brag that one of my students is at ARC. But yeah, so the research center, I mean, this stuff is great. So what do you guys think? Would someone like Kathy Woods invest in you know, the software company that we evaluated? Logan,
I said no.
why?
Well, they do have like interests in fields that ARC's like, currently invested in. I don't think it's disruptive enough for them. Like they're not necessarily breaking new ground in what they're doing. And I don't think they're going to change the world. So that's why I said no.
Any other thoughts?
I also felt like they wouldn't, but at the end I kind of went with, you know what, it felt like it was pretty, a tech that a lot more schools could adopt and should. So I went with yes overall. And they seemed yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because sometimes the space is really, really attractive, and this company has done so much with so little. So the counter argument, it's like, well, if they just tweak a little bit, I mean, if you look at, Chegg, right? Do you guys know Chegg, the student? Yeah, it's like it's a nothing tech company. All it is just homework that you just copy off of basically, and borrow content, right? I don't think that company is impressive at all, right? Yet it's traded on the Nasdaq. I think it's the market cap's about like $10 billion. So you look at a company like this, then the counter argument's like, well, like look at a company like Chegg, right? So there is always a counter argument that could be applied, especially like in certain sectors in ed tech, like you saw in the sim. There is a sector in ed tech that's probably growing 18%. In fact, when I was looking at remote learning software, they were growing at about like 12 or 15% CAGR year over year. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Lai.
I said that they would invest in the company, but it was mainly for the platform because the digital platform that they had, the cloud-based, was I think difficult to replicate since they included like they tested it, include historical data, etc. So I felt that that was their competitive advantage, and if ARC were to invest in them, because they do have a well, the fourth question, I said that they were going to do the uh, Greater Internet Fund. Sorry. They have
Is it like an IoT fund or?
next generation internet, EFT.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So that's why I said they would invest.
Do you guys get a chance to look at the ARC Space Fund that they're going to launch in a couple months? Yeah, Persia? Are you going to invest in it? Throw some money in there?
We'll see. I don't know.
Okay. Let us know if you do. I'm in ARC G, genetics, and then just the regular RK fund. So we'll see once the ARC Space Fund is available. Any other thoughts? Yeah, so for me, like personally, I think the answer would be no. I do like the space, right? But it doesn't mean that she's probably going to invest in something that doesn't have the technology that could potentially be disruptive, right? And just looking at the financials and how the managers are paying themselves dividends, like Elon Musk would not pay himself like dividends, right? When he's only making like 5 million a year. I can't imagine him doing that. Or like Jack Dorsey, right? She's a big investor of Square for Jack Dorsey. Like I can't imagine him doing that. Or like Peloton, right? So who's the guy that is running Peloton? I know Peter Thiel's like a big investor of Peloton, but just generally, this company isn't really designed for innovation. Does it mean that it can't be innovative? No, that's not the case. Like if you're grabbing $2 million in profit every year, then you could use that money for R&D, right? To expand your product line, etc. So a company like the one that you saw could be a very interesting candidate for a private equity buyout, where you bring in a new management team, structure it, create a new culture, and then with the profit that you make, maybe you potentially scale, right? But as a VC investor, taking in a minority stake and not removing the management team, that's a completely different story. So it's not exciting for a VC because you can't remove the CEO and restructure the company, but it could be a very, very interesting play for a PE firm, right? So there's all these different ways of, you could probably think depending on the nature of the company and how it would fit in with someone's investment thesis. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, cool. So I think we covered the homework pretty well. So we'll talk about some of the readings that we did. Your Grubhub homework is more like a review because you guys all mentioned that you're comfortable with finance. So most of the stuff you can kind of Google it yourself and just give yourself a refresher. If you can get most of the questions right, you're probably in really good shape for this class. That's not due till tomorrow. And for that one, you can do in groups of 2 if you'd like. So have at it. And then you'll probably, moving forward, you're going to do things in groups for certain group assignments. One thing I want to clarify on the syllabus, I'm not sure if it got uploaded incorrectly. So I uploaded the syllabus one more time. And if you check now, I believe you're going to see just like more details on what to read and the homework. Do you guys see this? Just can someone check real quick on Canvas? So each week there's just a general topic that we're going to talk about. So make sure you do the readings for the upcoming topic. So for example, for tomorrow or for tomorrow, right? Just make sure to watch the Tam Sam Sum videos. And then there's a Tam Sam Sum assumption mistake, like a very small case study. It shouldn't take more than 40 minutes, I think, to just go over this. And then we're going to do financial models. And then each reading and video assignment is preparation for the following week. Does that make sense? Okay. And then if you don't see it here, if there's any kind of hiccup, you should be able to see things updated on the modules page.
I don't think the updated syllabus is on Canvas. I think it's still the old one.
You're not seeing this version.
I actually see it in mine.
Yeah, I see it on mine as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. Maybe you could log in and log out, Persia. I don't know. I can email it to you too. If it's not updated. Okay, and you'll see. So there's 8 weeks, right? So I'm gonna add all the homework and like reading material and the videos for Friday and Saturday together under that particular week. Does that make sense? So last week this was all week 1, and then half of week 2 is here, and then I'm gonna start releasing them as they seem relevant. So I kind of hid all the ones that were not relevant just to not confuse you guys, and then I kind of restructured the class a little bit based on what you guys were asking. But yeah, if there's any kind of inconsistency between the syllabus and the module, just let me know. And then I think most of you guys hopped onto Slack, right? You guys try that? So feel free to communicate via Slack. I know a couple of you guys texted me. That's fine too. Since it's only 8 students, I don't mind text messages for the summer. But if you haven't had a chance to set up your Slack, go ahead and do so. I do respond a little bit more quickly on Slack because I'm already always on it. So yeah, feel free to use this as a resource. Cool. Any questions about syllabus? Okay.
I'm unable to access the Uber tam/sam/sum assumption mistake. I'm not sure if that was unavailable or.
Oh yeah. Oh, one thing. So sometimes on Canvas when I upload, I don't know why it does this, but it looks like it's unavailable, but it actually is. So Let me just show you real quick. So you click on this, and then it says, okay, this is actually showing. Okay, go to the Uber one, right? This is the Uber Tam Sum, and it says refuse to connect, right? Is this what you're seeing? Lai?
Mine says access denied.
Okay, do you see this part right here?
Yes, I can click on that and it still says access denied. I can share my screen if you want.
Oh, wow. Okay, let me just do that.
Me too, me too.
You don't try clicking it again and then try to access it like how I just did. No, still no.
It says access denied and you have access to view this resource and it stops me.
Oh, okay. Like, are you having any other trouble opening any other docs? Because I could just save this as PDF and then upload it instead.
That's the only document that I have trouble with.
Okay. Anyone else having any trouble with any other docs?
Only that one.
Oh, okay. So I'll just upload that via PDF, which I just downloaded, and then you guys could read it. It's actually pretty interesting. And it's only like a 3-minute read. Fantastic. So let's go talk about the readings. Did everyone get a chance to read Venture Deals? And my CNBC article about living in a van? Yeah, all right. Okay, cool. That's great. So let's just talk about, some basic concepts so you guys, could follow, this class very comfortably. So, what are angel investors? Who's an angel investor? Like who comes to mind? Angel investor.
Wealthy
Is it-
individuals.
Wealthy individuals, yeah. Maybe your professor, right?
Yeah.
Like Mario. Maybe me. I have a bad record though.
Fadel.
Huh?
Fadel. Lawandi.
Oh, I don't know that
Yeah.
professor. Sorry. Yeah. Who's the other guy? There's Mario, and then who's the other bald professor? Marshall. Marshall. Have you guys had class with Marshall Toplansky?
I did. It was cool.
Yeah, he's good. Angel investors, wealthy individuals, who else? Oftentimes, high, like, I guess like high income professionals, doctors, lawyers, especially in Silicon Valley, it's kind of like a bragging right to invest in certain startups. So you'll bump into, people who are like doctors, lawyers, and accountants that have their own practices that want to be angel investors. How are they different from, I guess, like venture capitalists? What's the difference between like a VC and angel investor?
Usually angel investors don't want to be known, while VCs do.
Oh, you did your reading, Lai. What about structurally?
I think they invest from their own money, and so they have like limited access to capital.
Who has limited access? VC?
No, angel investors.
Right. Angel has probably a smaller check size, right? What's also different about VCs versus angels? So generally, like angels, like you mentioned, they don't want to be known. They're much smaller. Can a VC also be an angel investor? So no one's really like a VC, right? It's like people working for a VC fund, right? So you might have like a vice president or a principal or even associate, and then the fund itself is the venture capital fund money that is getting released, right, to fund the startup. So in theory, like a vice president of a VC fund says like, hey, I like you, I want to invest in your startup, then they could just write their own check as an angel investor. So it's not like mutually exclusive. So I just want to be clear of that. And yeah, it's pretty common where oftentimes if a VC really likes you and you're not ready yet, well, one of the managing partners or the principals might still write you a check from their own personal account. So I have some funds, even in my own cap table, even right now, where certain investors just wrote from their own account. It could be a different reason. Maybe they don't even want to share the profits with their VC because they really like the founder instead, and they want to get more of an outsized return. So they separate that from their fund. If you're a managing partner, right, you're at like the top, like you are, there's a pretty good likelihood that you might want to do that, right? So that's a possibility. What's a syndicate? Anyone remember? Okay, syndicate is just like a group that comes together to write a check together, like a syndicate fund. You might write. So, for example, if I'm like raising money, right, for a startup, and 10 of my friends wants to invest, and then they don't have enough funds, and then they potentially want to follow on as an investor, but their check size is going to be so minimal, then what we could do is maybe run a campaign through AngelList or get like a main lead investor, and then we'll just follow on in like with his funds that's coming in. So all my friends that are writing $10,000 checks could get lumped into one tiny little syndicate, and it would be like a group that funded the fund together. So it's almost like a mini like VC fund in a way, where you're just aggregating capital and then putting that under one umbrella with one decision maker in theory, so that you don't, as an entrepreneur, if Lai wants to raise capital and then 10 of his friends wants to invest, he doesn't have to have 10 people sign the paperwork, which could be a pain in the butt. So that one or two lead investor in that syndicate would do that, and then they would be the main person in charge. This is actually really common in VC, when like someone like Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank, for example, when she was an investor, she not only invested, but she used her name because she had huge brand recognition to put down 20K on a $100,000 raise. So she had all our minions put in a bunch of money, and then that fund became 100,000. So it was through the Barbara Corcoran fund, along with her own personal investment, that she invested in our company. But she knew just the fact that people wanted to say, "Oh, I co-invested with Barbara Corcoran," right? It's a huge selling point. So you could, as an investor, you could use that angle. Hey, your buddy's joining us. What's his name? Luke.
His name's Rocky.
Hey, Rocky. What's
How's
up?
it going?
Good.
I work with Corcoran.
Oh, you work with Corcoran.
Yeah.
What's she up to now?
Well, we're actually a franchise, Corcoran Global Living. It's the franchise. They sold to Realogy in 2006.
Okay. That's yeah. So I was more in her tech fund. So you're part of her core business.
Yeah, I'm on the real estate side.
Do you know Phil Nadell?
It sounds familiar.
Okay. Yeah, he was the one in charge of the tech fund stuff. That's so funny. Small world.
I heard the name, so I had to pop in. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Any other one of you guys have roommates that have experience working with Barbara Corcoran? No, I'm just kidding. 4 other guys like come in. No, that's great. Thanks for tell your roommate thanks for hopping in. So that's an example of a syndicate, right? What were the why were the 2 things that matter most mentioned in the book? Costs and assumptions. Why is that important? In financial modeling. So this is going to be a test question, guys. I ask for it like it's in the test for every single quarter, by the way, and people still get it wrong sometimes. Cost and assumption. Why are those 2 things that are, why are those 2 things the most important thing when it comes to financial modeling?
Maybe because it indicates how long does it take for a business to get the level of like passing the cash burning and getting like to normal business, to day-to-day operation.
If that were the case, why wouldn't you use revenue as well? You're trying to do a break-even analysis, right?
Yeah, so basically when you're like having a startup, starting a business, it takes like some time that you have to like build the infrastructure and like build the business. So there is costs that you have to cover and there is no revenue, so I believe the time that it takes you to get to the revenue, not the revenue, just the time that you have to like spend, it's important.
Okay. We'll sit on that for a second. Let's go to lie.
Is it because you can't estimate, or you don't know your exact revenue, but you can know your exact cost?
Yeah, Lie, you definitely did your reading this. So you can't predict when a customer is going to sign up for your company's deal, right? Whether you're selling clothes, selling coffee, you can't really predict that, right? But do you have control over your own cost? Yes or no? For the most part, right? Like how much you're going to pay in electricity bills, more or less. How much you decided to commit in wages. How many inventory you purchased, right? To predict for sales for the next month. So cost is relatively predictable compared to something like top line revenue, which is so hard to predict. And by the way, anytime you show an investor a pitch deck, we call this founder optimism. We dock all your sales by like half. Or that's an extreme case, but at least anywhere from 20% to 50%, we'll dock all your numbers. But in terms of cost, it's usually more reasonable, right? Assumptions. Why is that important? Man, Persia, you have so many friends walking around, like guests walking around. What is going on there?
The AC at our house is broken, so we're at my mom's.
Oh, okay. So like so many people coming and going. Oh my gosh. Whoa. Hey. Like you must feel so lame. Like everyone's just
It's the whole bunch. Well, it's actually my mom's 1-year anniversary with my stepdad, and so we're just hanging out here. They're about to go out. So.
Oh, okay. Congrats. Yeah. Good times. Yeah, I have like 2 of my friends just like hanging out in the other room. They're like visiting me from Chicago. I'm like, guys, you have to wait. Where were we? Okay, assumptions. Why is that important?
Because you need assumptions in order to build like financial models and projections and stuff like that, because you can't have information from the future.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. And Logan, you're smart because I don't think you did the reading. Did you?
I read through the article of you living in a van. I did not make it to the
Okay. I'm just messing with you. Okay. So yeah, so assumptions are like it bothers me when people are like, oh, I'm doing financial modeling, financial. It's not about punching in numbers. It's how you rationalize the numbers that you come up with. So anytime we're going to talk about this tomorrow when we're doing financial modeling, like I expect detailed footnotes, sources, links, all that stuff, right? Just make sure that's included so you can explain to a VC, oh, wait, no, this report's by McKinsey. No, it's right. The Kager's right. It's from Ibis World. You need to be able to reference those points. Otherwise, you're going to look like you just pulled numbers out of your ass. And you don't want to do that because it's after a certain point, financial modeling and company valuations, it becomes it's a good combination of art and science. No one's completely right, no one's completely wrong, right? Anyone can learn Excel and income statements, balance sheets, cash flows, but you need to be able to interpret it, really, really well. And hence the reason why the battle happens in the assumptions, in essence, and building them out. So, always remember that. So I like all these guys are always wrong. Like all these financial analysts, they're always wrong. And what's happening in today's world, this is more of my thesis, is that so many financial analysts that go to go to the Whartons, and MIT even has a freaking business program now for undergrad, which is crazy. And they go to all these great schools, and they do the Goldman, they do the McKinsey, all that stuff. And then what ends up happening is that they don't really understand tech. And that's where Kathy Wood's thesis is so amazing, because I think one of her videos, she talks about like traditional financial analysts cannot assess, companies like, Tesla or Square or like blockchain, et cetera, because of the way they're taught. And they're not taught to understand technology and its ability to, have that hockey stick curve, right? So she's been talking about that for numerous years, which is, I think, very, very profound. So if you understand tech in this world, where so many, traditional, like all companies are going to be becoming tech companies, right? According to Paul Graham. It's like a quote back in 2009, all companies are going to be software companies. And if you're able to kind of be ahead of that curve and really understand that, then you're going to have so much of an edge than someone who's done the CFA or went to a top MBA school or CPA, etc. So going back, this all ties into assumptions somehow, because you need to understand tech and how to build a financial model based off the assumptions. Some simple stuff. VCs love demos. Why? You guys remember?
Because it allows them to have communicate with the entrepreneur, have an emotional interest in the product, and experience liking the vision of the product company firsthand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they love to touch, feel, see it. You gotta see it to believe it, type of thing. If you guys are working on a startup or any kind of concept, I could recommend some sites that you can build like a proof of concept before actually building a prototype. And some of these software, I guess like web apps, they're very interactive. So you can almost click on the app demo as if it's like an app itself. So they do a really good job nowadays on how to make this really good. Finding the right VC and the importance of lead investors. So why do you think this is important? Finding the right investors. So someone told me like in America there's only one color, and that color is green. I was like, man, that's a good quote. But I do beg to differ. Well, yeah, for the purpose of this class and to explain this concept. So yeah, why do you guys think this is important?
Usually you don't want to go into business with somebody that you don't like, because that'll just build tensions down the line and eventually resentment of some kind.
Yeah. Do you guys know who John Scully is?
The name is familiar.
John Scully. Do you guys remember the Coke versus Pepsi challenge? And then how Pepsi won over its market share versus Coca-Cola by doing like the taste challenge? So they would cover up people's eyes and they'll take one sip of Coke, one sip of Pepsi, and then Pepsi was winning out. You guys know that story? Okay, so back in the 70s, I'm really like 85 years old. Back in the 70s, and Pepsi was like up and coming, and they were trying to figure out a way to take market share from Coca-Cola, because there's only Coca-Cola and Pepsi, really, if you look at the market, right? And John Scully, brilliant CMO at the time, he came up with this challenge. He's like, why don't we just blindfold a bunch of people and just like mano a mano, just go against the Goliath Coke, and then see, who actually likes, see what they actually like, what the customers actually like. So Pepsi was just constantly like kicking butt. So Pepsi was constantly, gaining market share because of this initiative, and there was all these commercials behind it. It turns out like Pepsi is sweeter than Coca-Cola. So if you just take one sip, you prefer Pepsi, but if you want the whole can, you actually like Coca-Cola. But, you know, the proof was in the pudding, at least to the consumers at that time, Pepsi was a superior product. So John Scully, I think he became the CEO, I can't remember, of Pepsi eventually. But Steve Jobs flies out and they're trying to look for, you know, their chief marketing officer. And he says a legendary quote that won John Scully over at the time. And he says, like, do you want to change the world, or you want to you want to sell sugar water your whole freaking life, right? And that just changed John Scully's trajectory. And then what ended up happening, John Scully becomes the favorite board member, convinces them to, you know, kick out Steve Jobs from his own company, right? So obviously there was some kind of misalignment, right, between investors, potential C-level executives coming in, along with Steve Jobs. So again, I love talking about founders who get fired from their own company because I am one myself pretty much. But it's a very interesting dynamic, as well as an important dynamic, to really understand that alignment with you and your investors. Because when push comes to shove, if you guys are so far apart and one group is focused on, you know, short-term profitability, but you're focused on long-term vision, then that's going to cause a huge headache, you know, 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Now, if you're desperate for cash because, you know, like, again, like I said earlier, you know, there's only one color in the US according to one of my investors, and that color is green. If you're desperate for cash, take it, because I mean, you know, I mean, the alternative is going bankrupt, right? But be very conscious and selective in the amount, so you're not like tied in as, you know, more deeply than you want to be in those types of scenarios. So you know, what I encourage a lot of founders to do is that when you're looking at an investor group, whether it's a PE investor, angel investor, VC investor, look at the companies they invested in, talk to the founders that got funded by them, ask, you know, if you ever had them as an advisor, board seat, what kind of advice do they provide? Try to find their track record, like find all this information, like no matter how desperate you are, at the very least, you're going to come into that meeting as a super expert, knowing everything. It's like, oh, in 2015, you know, you invested in this startup, but how come you didn't do a follow-on round? Like, why didn't you invest in their competitor? Like, just knowing the history of that VC or even that angel investor's history, like, will impress them a lot. Because I'm so shocked at how little founders and entrepreneurs do research on you know, investors that they want to impress, and they don't do a lot, actually. So if you're able to do that, you're definitely going to have an edge. So, you know, when you're considering investors, consider that. And then, because I know, you know, it seems like a good amount of you guys did the reading. Because investors are so brand conscious, they're really conscious of who's the lead investor. So it's very important you get like a really good name early on in your funding round, and then everything just kind of trickles down. If you're getting bad investors from the very beginning, believe it or not, surprise, surprise, investors are kind of like, you know, that the cool kids in high school. Are they still like that? Like, you know, back in my day, there was like the cool kids, but when they enter their 20s, they're not so cool anymore usually. Is it kind of like that now, still in high school? I don't know, but I think you guys get my point if you watch an 80s movie. What's that, Logan?
It's still kind of the same thing.
Oh, okay. It's still kind of the same thing. Okay. So it's good. High school hasn't changed too much. So they're kind of like the cool kids. So they want to be associated with top brands over and over again. So getting that initial lead investor is just very important to get that brand down. Create competition, very similar concept. You want to make sure that, you know, all these investors are fighting for you. So the intensity of the fundraise is very, very important. Don't drag out your fundraising for like 2 years. Try to get it done in 2 months, get all the emails in, and then have that velocity that makes you seem, right, like you have a lot of opportunities. Does anyone remember the slow no? Line.
So you have to be aware of VCs that are slow to give you no because they're just stringing you along.
Yeah. So generally speaking, like, you know, VCs, they don't like to say no. They like to have a lot of options. And me as a former founder, I definitely know when I experienced that. And it sucks because I'm doing the same thing right now too. When I'm looking at companies to purchase, I just can't say no. I just feel so bad. because some of these, business owners, they get really excited to work with us, and it's a psychological thing, right? Because you want to make sure you have a date to the prom. Do you guys still do that? Go to prom and stuff? I don't know, in high school. Like you want to, like, it's like having a backup prom date, and you want to make sure you have someone to go with. You don't want to be the one that is like doesn't have anything, right? So it's like creating a backup for a backup for a backup, and you want to make sure you have a lot of options, because the mandate that VCs have is that they have a lot of limited partners and they need to deploy capital, right? And they're trying to deploy capital, fill their fund by certain times, etc. So for those reasons, it's so hard for VCs to say no. And additionally, you don't want to create a bad rep with so many startup founders, etc. So you want to make sure that you kind of tend to avoid telling these companies no, just because you're very cautious of it. It's like walking on eggshells sometimes. Okay, so let's talk about Hacker's Guide. Investors make a startup hub. What do you guys think about this? What are some startup hubs, by the way? What are some startup hotspots? San Francisco, Austin. What are some like newer places? I think Miami's up and coming, right? New York City, Silicon Beach maybe for a little bit. Shenzhen in China is like really starting to boom. Singapore. So there's like a lot of international startups. So you're going to see in Paul Meyer's lecture, which is going to be posted for the following week. But there's a rise in international startup hubs nowadays. So if you're looking to, raise capital, like San Francisco and Silicon Valley is not the only option, as well as Austin or like, a Boston or like a New York. There's plenty of startup hubs out there, and it's for investors, like oftentimes, especially when there's a tech product or even like a PE deal, like you don't know if it's a good deal or a bad deal. And after a certain point, you just have to trust the founder. There's only so much you can tell, right? And if a seller's continuously trying to manipulate the numbers, or there's certain invoices not collected, like you don't know. I mean, you don't know what's under the hood, like compared to someone who's ran the business for like 20 years. So having that face time is really, really critical. What some startups do is that they'll raise money for a few months, like in Silicon Valley, get that high valuation, and then build their startup in like Israel or Latin America or wherever country that they're from, right? To lower their cost of overhead, which I think is not a bad strategy if you think about it. So usually East Coast and West Coast, the valuations are a lot higher. The Midwest, they have much more reasonable valuations. And there's like a very binary effect, right? So if you're like a really awesome startup like in Chicago, it might be easier for you to raise capital, but you might not get some of the big brand names like the Sequoias, the Andreessens, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of pros and cons when you're thinking about startup hubs. Most investors are not like founders. What do you guys think about this? What's an average like VC investor like to you guys?
They see only one color.
That's good. What else? They're usually like finance guys, right? You go to banking, you do investment management, then you do your MBA, very typical like route, right? So when a finance guy usually meets a founder, like oftentimes they try to relate, but oftentimes they're not someone that have gone through what the founder has gone through. So I was telling someone, like, when an investor looks at a business, oftentimes it's just comparing, okay, so this car had this type of engine, you know, then it had these types of tires, and it was like this kind of steering wheel. So parts of it is like a Porsche, parts of it's like a Ferrari, parts of it's like a Honda. So it's like worth this much. Whereas like an entrepreneur is someone that actually drove the vehicle, the way I see it. So when you're like, when you spend something like 10, 20 years, you know, being an entrepreneur, you start seeing things very different. Like when I think about like accounts receivables, I think like, okay, who the heck didn't check their like pipe drive or their Salesforce to see which clients like paid? Like, what do I need to fix? Who do I need to fire? That's like the thing that I immediately think of. My brain doesn't go naturally into like, well, company ABC did like had this many much accounts receivables and their current ratio is much, like I don't think like that. I think like, okay, what are the things that I need to fix, right? So when you take the average, you know, financier or investor, and you take the average entrepreneur, right? And I'm talking about investors that haven't had the entrepreneurial experience. You end up literally speaking two different languages. And what I often see is that these types of entrepreneurs that have never worked with like, you know, a serial entrepreneur, they feel much more comfortable backing someone that's like them, like that, you know, worked at the same consulting company or investment management company or went to the same school. So there's definitely that bias that is, you know, really, really annoying. And on the other hand, if you really think about it, the ones that who normally start the VC fund or the PE fund are entrepreneurs that had like really, really big exits. So in those scenarios, if you're able to get to talk to a managing partner or someone much higher up, then there's a good chance that you might be able to mesh significantly better in those scenarios. Um, Most investors are momentum investors. I think we covered that. You know, oftentimes investors will chase other investors and then their opinion. Um, what really annoys me is that when an investor asks like, okay, who else is investing? Or what does like so and so think about this? Right? In those types of scenarios, it's like, dude, are you so like intellectually lazy to a point where you're not able to do your own research? Right. So one of my friends who was raising money for a startup recently, an investor just straight up told him like, I only invest in kids that came out of Harvard, like just straight up. And then he went to Harvard, right? He's like, I didn't take money from him. Like, why? You went to Harvard. He's like, no, dude, that's so intellectually lazy. Like, what kind of lazy investor does that? And you know, it's not a good sign if an investor is not thinking right independently. You don't want investors like that in your cap table. But nonetheless, you know, it's just human nature. They don't want to be the one that misses out, and they don't want to look dumb being the only one investing in a company that no one else believes in. So they're gonna want to, you know, co-invest with their golf buddies, with their, you know, ski trip buddies, with their, you know, happy hour buddies, etc. It's just inevitable. So you are gonna get some clusters, but this is where for me I really like to work with international investors. So this time around, 20% of my investor group is international. Like they just don't know each other, right? So it was very important for me to create groups that don't go under this group thing because I wanted the best ideas to survive. So yeah, if you guys are you know, doing startups, like we can talk about like just, you know, international fundraising. By the way, most of the times, international angel investors and international VCs, they don't get enough outreach from American entrepreneurs. So when they do write you a check, it's normally outsized compared to the American investor. So remember that. Like, I don't know why enough American entrepreneurs don't know this, because everyone wants to invest in the US because it's still the most stable economy. It's the largest in terms of like the financial markets, right? So they want to deploy capital here, but they get a they have more capital, assuming you hit up the right VCs. They have more capital that they want to deploy, and they're just waiting. They're just waiting. And then oftentimes it's usually the desperate entrepreneurs that go that couldn't find investors in the US, but just go to them from the very beginning. They'll just like do so much more work for you. And if your startup grows or if your company grows, then you'll have an opportunity to expand globally much more quicker. So that's I would always hit up like Korea, China, Japan. That was like my thing, because they all, Korea, Japan, China, they always like compete against each other. It's ridiculous. You know, Persia's like smiling about that. I think she gets it. So you create this rivalry, then you go to the American investors and you're like, oh, I got like, these, 2-3 investors from this region. They get so excited. Okay. Valuations. Okay. VCs want to invest large amounts. I think that's self-explanatory. When they do invest, they feel like they're making the right bet. So they want to double down. I think this is really important. Valuations are fiction. What do you guys think this means?
In essence, it's saying any valuation that's brought forward, it's I mean, it is what the sentence or the 3 words say. It's fiction. It's not necessarily real or 100% at least grounded in reality.
Yeah, man, you have a way with words. So definitely, yeah, it's just made up, right? So we could like, like look at NFTs. Like it's just so ridiculous. Like why are NFTs like so freaking expensive? And like Bitcoin was worth, I thought it was gonna hit 70K like 2 months ago, and now what is it, like 35? Valuations are always up and down. Even a lot of these small cap penny stocks intraday, they can fluctuate 30%. So who's to say when you look at, the sim that you saw, who's to say like I can't pay just $10 million for it when they want 20, right? So they asked for 20. I submitted a bid for 14, and I'm like, well, why is it 14? I'm like, I pay what I want to pay. Like, what's the big deal? Like, it's my fund, it's my money. 14 million. End of story. You don't have to explain it. You could do, valuation analysis. It was really interesting because yesterday I had a meeting with a couple of PE investors, and they all said, hey, let's put our heads together and then let's try to aggregate on a spreadsheet the average ask price of what everyone is asking, so we know the current valuation of all these different industries. I'm like, why would you waste time doing that? I don't care what the industry is paying. I'm going to pay what I want to pay. Like, that's it. It's end of story. It's going to be reasonable. I'm not going to pay like $1 million when it's worth like 20. But if I could build the software myself, and if I can build a sales team myself, like, why does it matter? At the end of the day, it's an agreement between 2 parties, right? And if you can come to that agreement at that magical number that both parties are motivated to close a deal, then it's a done deal. It's as simple as that. Same thing in the VC space, same thing in the PE space. Stock market's a little bit different because it's, publicly traded. But, at the end of the day, like, valuations are simply made up. So don't get too hung up on that concept. And I think a lot of, young entrepreneurs get really overly excited about their company's valuation, or overly demotivated by that. It could be a good checkpoint, but it's not the end all be all. And at the end of the day, it's really what price you sell your company for, not the price that you fundraise your company at. So it's always about the exit price, not the midpoint, not the seed stage or anything like that. Investors look for founders like the current stars. Back in the early 2010s, when Steve Jobs was a big deal, there's like this phenomenon where every Silicon Valley founder tried to be an asshole like Steve Jobs. It was really, really funny, because all the investors were looking for Steve Jobs. And I think now is like, the new thing is like Elon Musk. Everyone's looking for the next Elon Musk. So it's like, it's just a thing. It's a phase, right? So don't get, too excited about it, but they do have an interesting take on narrative, right? And it was really funny. Like, there's like an investor that asked me recently, oh, so what's your management style? And I was like, I'm an amazing micromanager. And I just went on for like 30 minutes, the benefits of micromanagement. Like, this guy, of course she didn't fund me, but I didn't want her money either. But I was like, what the hell? It's like, I'm like, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Walt Disney, they're all micromanagers. I'm just like them. I'm just amazing micromanager. Just went on and on. I was like, no, I don't just micromanage. I nano manage. And I sent her an article about the benefits of micromanagement that I wrote for Inc. magazine. And yeah, I never heard back from her. So hey, I was like almost done with my fundraise. I didn't really care that much. VCs are looking always, it's high school. Just remember that high school analogy. They always worry about looking bad. They collude, they co-invest. Negotiations never stop. So I think this is really important. So sometimes, people like recently even like, one of the sellers told me, hey, I'm getting all these offers, all these emails, all these interests. I'm like, and I'm getting all these like LOIs, right? Letter of intent to buy. I'm like, well, did the money hit your bank account yet? Like he said it didn't. I'm like, okay, then like, even my niece's lemonade stand is getting like acquisition offers in this market. Like nothing counts until I was gonna add like she's not even born yet, but that was like too mean. So I was like, I deleted that and I just sent it off. And then he respected me, and now we're negotiating. He wants $40 million for his company, but like he's like this MIT software CEO that had like 2 or 3 exits multiple times. So it was really funny how he respected me after that comment. But sometimes, like the other case, like it completely backfires. But I think during negotiations, sometimes, and this is just any investor, not just VC or PE, like you reach a point where you have to make a big move and come out swinging. Like you have to throw a haymaker at some point. If you do a lot of negotiations, you'll know when to do it. So I like to say like, yeah, I like to punch people in the nose and then offer them a beer. But if you're bad at sales, you just end up punching them in the nose and then punching them in the chin, and then you just kill the deal on the spot. Like I've seen disasters happen when they try to use this strategy. So, practice on your friend a couple times, or at a restaurant negotiating a tip or something. Like just practice it somewhere before like implementing and screwing up on like a $10 million deal, if you ever get to that point. But there are investors that will pull out last minute and get cold feet. So don't count your chickens before they hatch. Like always make sure you close, you follow, you finish the freaking deal. Don't get happy about like a verbal commitment or just a signed signature. It doesn't count until it hits your bank account. Investors like it when you don't need them. Hate bringing up another dating analogy, but it's like if you seem like you don't need to be in a relationship, or don't like, if you have plenty of options dating wise, it's the same thing. Like investors, like people don't like it when anyone seems desperate, especially if you're desperate for money. And it just bothers me so much when startup founders hit me up when they're about to fundraise. I'm like, dude, you should have kept me posted like every single month, like an investor update every single month. And so many founders fail to do that. And I would say about 90% of founders fail to provide quarterly or monthly updates. So even if you're running a non-funded company, it's really smart to have an advisory board, like 3 or 4 people, even if it's just like an e-commerce business, and just hit them up. And then if you want to like actually raise and like really hit a growth spurt for your company, then you have the relationship already established. Even if they don't respond to you every single time, they understand your journey every single month. It's like a checkpoint. It's like a book you read, like the updates, right? And oftentimes, you want to talk about the lessons you learned, things that you failed to accomplish as well. Just be very open and transparent. Your goals are for the following month, and ask like, hey, do you have any advice on this? Do you have any advice on outsourcing? Do you have any advice on Facebook ads? Just always try to keep it very, very engaging. So like, for me, I like to do about 200 investors on my monthly updates. In my current group, there's only 22 investors. But I've added like just so many people on there just because like people just like reading them, even though they weren't part of my cap table. And I encourage founders to do that a lot. And one of my companies that I sit on the advisory board, like he just started doing it with just like 20 people. And then one of the angel investors just hit him up and said, hey, I've been reading your monthly updates. Like when you're ready to raise, like I would love to, invest in you. Right. So it's not bad, because people want to see consistency and they're always looking for good deals. So let's just go over, I feel like I, covered a lot about my background, but let's just go over the man van thing, because this is probably the only week we're going to talk more about like life as an entrepreneur. Who had a chance to do the reading for the man van article? Hey, you got a couple people. Okay. Okay, so this was like my experience living and working out of a van, and did it for about 2 years, and then I talk about like the impact of reality distortion. So sometimes when you're so deeply like baked into your craft, like your reality just completely readjusts. So I talk about, some of the basic challenges I had, right? How can you sleep on a seat? Is it safe to sleep on, like, can you get robbed? Where do you shower? How do you get internet? Like, can you stay focused? Like I talk about like if my head is sloped downward at a 45-degree angle, like am I going to have um some kind of medical emergency that I need to worry about? But at the end, I talk about basically, anything you put your mind into it, like literally becomes your reality. So there's this one incident in Korea that reminded me, when I was 9 years old. There's this department store, and then the department store completely collapsed. And then it collapsed after like 9 days, 11 days. No, actually, after 9 days since it's collapsed, they found a survivor, and then 12 days they found another survivor, and then another like 17 days or something like that they found another survivor. And basically, you know what the survivors mentioned was that they just completely lost track of time, and their perception of time was so distorted to a point where they thought they were just there for like 5 days, which was pretty crazy. So I talk about, when you're like essentially trying to be you're when you're trying to be a founder, and you're trying to do these crazy things, like it's really up to you on how you want to, build your company. Like it's really up to you on whether you think you can make it happen or not. I mean, I know it sounds, kind of cliche, but if you do get a chance, do check out the article. Do you guys have any questions for those of you guys who had a chance to read it? Any questions about it?
I don't think the article did mention how did you have any chance of getting robbed? Like, because sleeping in a parking lot in the middle of the night, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, there was just like one time I was like, this guy tried to like rob me, and then it was like Memphis or something like that. It was dark. It was like 12 or 1 o'clock. I was coming out of like a chicken and waffles place. And he kept on like asking, like, hey, can I see your car? Can I see your car? I was like, dude, there's nothing in my car. I'm broke. And he's like, hey, can I see your car? He kept on like following me. And then I opened up my hood, and then I just cussed him out. Like, you mother, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, dude, look at me. I live in a freaking van. I'm like just as broke as you are. And he's just like walked away. But at that point, like, I was like, hey, get your hands out of your pocket. Like, I told him, get your hands out of your freaking pocket. Like, you're not BSing me here. And then I got a little feisty, and then I popped the hood, and then I just yelled at him, like, dude, I'm not doing much better than you. But he bought into the story that I was broke living in my van. Um, that was, I think, potentially what could have gotten a little bit dangerous. Um, what else was there? I thought about buying one of those tasers just in case after that incident. But most of the time I was sleeping at like you know, McDonald's, Courtyard Marriott, pretty safe places. There was one time where I fell asleep in front of someone's barnyard, and then it's a couple old folks, like it's like 5 in the morning. They're like knocking on the door of my car, and they offered me to like sleep. It was like somewhere in Louisiana. That was really cool. Um, but yeah, it was interesting because they, my co-founders thought I could only last 2 weeks, and then it became 2 months, and then it became 2 years, and then it was just this crazy media blitz from everywhere, from like China's Xinhua News to even like a small documentary on Verge, that we did, and did some reality TV shows. Thank God they never went live, because there's like, living in LA. I mean, you have all these producers that have like pilots. So I did like 3 or 4 pilot episodes of like all these random like reality TV shows, and then it turns out I'm a horrible actor, which is great. So none of them went public. So that was good. I would be so embarrassed if that happened at this age. Yeah, one of them was like living in a van. One of them was like Silicon Alley. One of them was like Shark Tank, but for dating. That one was weird. can't remember. So there's like all these random ones that I did for a little bit to get some more PR, but none of them went in public. Anything else? I would cover this more, but like we're kind of short on time. But any other questions? Cool. So let's take a break here, and we will talk about PE and VC at 7:30. Cool. Okay. See you guys in 6.
Professor, I think you're still muted.
Oh, okay. No wonder no one laughed at my joke. I was like, that was a good one. All right, so let's talk about PE and VC. I know we talked a little bit about it, right? But what are some main things that come to mind when it comes to the difference between PE and VC for you guys?
I think P are looking for more stable businesses, and VCs are like looking for businesses that have high potential growth. And so there are basically maybe new and innovative.
That is correct. What else? So we talked about maturity, right, of a company, right? They look at companies at different life cycles. What else?
I believe PEs are more invested in the actual structure and daily operations, if I'm not mistaken, of most companies. And venture capital, like Puya said, is just kind of like we're here to make money now, rather than later.
More skin in the game, right? So more control of the company. What else? Which one is bigger? Is the PE world bigger or the VC world bigger? Which one's on the news more? Let's start there.
Aren't venture capital firms more in the news?
Anyone beg to differ? So who says okay, who says VC is more on the news? VC deals are more on the news. Two hands. Okay, who says PE deals are more on the news? Interesting. Oh, interesting. Okay. So I don't know. I think VC deals are more on the news. I don't know. I just wanted to ask that. But you never hear like BlackRock, KKR or some of these big companies buys out manufacturing plant for 500 million. But you do hear startups, right? The next innovative blockchain startup raises $10 million Series A. So for the VC market, PE is a critical engine that drives and allures top talent and draws attention to get a lot of good deal flow. It's really, really crucial. So with that said, I definitely think it's VC for sure. I don't know exactly, but VC is very prevalent, and their growth engine is very dependent on getting PR attention. But going back to the original question, which market is bigger? Is it PE or VC? Well, the answer is private equity is significantly bigger. It's not even close. I think VC is maybe 10% of the PE market. Now, by its true academic definition, and remember this, guys, VC is part of PE. Because why? What does PE actually mean? What does PE stand for? Private equity, right? It's just anything that's not publicly traded is private equity. You privately give shares to your friends, it's private equity, right? So VC is doing the same thing. It's not public. So VC is just really an umbrella of PE, or like a niche, if you will, that focuses on minority investments opposed to majority investments. And because you're investing in minority high growth startups, you need PR to make a huge splash, like a TikTok or like a WhatsApp, or what are some of the Airbnb, Uber. A lot of these companies are also B2C businesses in the VC space, or B2B2C businesses, while as PR, because of the consistent revenue, steady cash flows, they're looking for profitability. Generally, you don't really need PR. No one's, like recently, I was talking to VC about like death tech, right? It's like something related to funeral homes, or like, I don't know, you have some software like transporting dead bodies. It's just very like, it's just too crazy for me, right? And like those types of businesses are not going to be like, they're not going to get a lot of media attention, right? But they could be very, very highly profitable businesses, right? Or like a lawn mowing business, maybe in the Midwest somewhere. Like, these are just very attractive to potentially like PE firms. Now, there are other companies, like for example, Vista Equity Partners, based in Chicago, that started to be a lot more aggressive, investing in software companies. So their fund size is something like $700 billion. They even have a hedge fund um, underneath the parent company to use their research to trade long short stock. So do we have any people like, who are familiar with hedge funds and like the long short strategy? You go long one company, you short the other, switch positions, stuff like that. So they actually use that data, to be able to use that knowledge into different asset classes. So with that said, more and more PE shops are becoming, I guess, somewhat like VC, because every company is becoming more like a software business. But in the grand scheme of things, the VC space is a subset, if you will, by the definition of, in like academic theory, or how you really categorize in finance. It's really under PE, private equity. But when you talk about PE versus VC colloquially, right? Like with people in the finance profession, they usually separate those two when they explain careers in private equity or VC, or we're talking about VC deal or private equity deal. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So this is basically, a simple way of, wait, am I sharing my screen yet? Okay. You guys see my screen now, right? Okay. So this is basically very simple analogy. VC, you're starting from the seed stage. PE, you're trying to capture it, right, as it's growing. You're trying to capture its growth spurt. So you hit that hockey stick curve. And if you think about, the types of companies that they invest in, right? So if you're looking at a PE, fund versus a VC fund, what are some of the types of companies that they would invest in, and what characteristics would they have? Just given, this imagery and what we just discussed. So yeah, PE firms would buy, mature companies, right? Stable cash flow, much more mature in the life cycle. They often want to, buy companies as a platform to add on additional services. And this is called a roll-up strategy. Are you guys familiar with the roll-up strategy? What is it, Logan?
I mean, isn't it essentially what you just said, where it's like an example? Sorry, an example somebody who would follow that would be Facebook, for instance. Like, didn't they just buy? What is it? There's so many different chats out in the world that are apps, but is it WhatsApp? They just bought WhatsApp so they could integrate what is it? More international communications and stuff like that.
Yeah. Facebook is, I guess, like slightly modern, right? So I guess you could say it's a roll-up strategy. But yeah, because they're all like, they're trying to dominate the social media space. So it's like they bought Instagram, they bought, WhatsApp, they bought all these different companies. But like a roll-up strategy, what really comes to mind is its repeatability, right? You're looking for companies that look almost the same. Warren Buffett and how he consolidated the insurance industry is a really good example of a roll-up strategy, because it's like almost the same. Why Facebook's slightly different is because you're venturing out in a new completely industry. Well, it could be kind of like Cisco in the 90s, how they grew by buying a bunch of companies in tech. But it's hard to say it's repeatable sometimes, because it comes out as a case by case. So a typical roll-up strategy like a PE fund would do is that they would buy a big company in the biggest possible company that they can. For example, like Warren Buffett, let's say in the insurance industry, and they'll just buy these tiny shops with just like 5 people to 50 people, and you're just like adding them, cutting costs, cutting costs, cutting costs. So over time, your fixed cost is relatively the same. It doesn't go up much, and then your variable cost like impacts your top line significantly less because you're not going to have as much overhead, right? And you're going to reach economies of scale by consolidating so many players. And then once you do that, you have pricing control within that industry. So PE firms do buy mature companies, but keep in mind they will buy smaller companies as an add-on strategy. But when you're thinking about in a very simplified, okay, how is PE different from VC? Then you're just thinking, okay, yeah, they buy more mature companies. They're not going to buy a startup that has like 100,000 a year in revenue. Like, hey, good job. Let me buy you for like 2 million. You're going to be the next Facebook. No, they don't do that. Just FYI. So that's I think the first and foremost important characteristic. Types of companies. Well, what kind of companies? Let me see here. What type of companies does each target? So PE firms buy majority control, right? And then they generally like to transform stuff. They generally look at all industries. VCs, they need to justify their returns because they're only hitting home runs. So VCs so it's so crazy to me. Like when I told a couple of my investors I'm going to private equity and I'm no longer doing the VC game, they're like so shocked. Like, Kevin, your next one is going to be so big. I'm going to invest in you again. I'm like, dude, you invested in like 3 times, you lost money so many times. Like, why would you do this to yourself? I wasted all my prime years in the movie ticketing space. So like, no, like we know it was just based off of it's very serendipitous, like the chances of you exiting or not, because you either like go big or go home. And oftentimes there's a lot of great entrepreneurs that are able to scale very quickly, but they don't have the exit that they should have had. And it could be a lot of reasons. In my case, several times the investors wanted us to grow more when we had term sheets, like really good term sheets where we could potentially exit. So then I ended up selling my shares, but like it's a long story. Like some of my, most of the investors didn't exit, but I exited because I wanted to move on and do something else. But investors, when they look at these types of opportunities, they don't mind, even some of their previous entrepreneurs failing because they all want to go for the next one. So I have a friend that sold his company for 30 million, one for 60 million, one for 90 million. None of them hit that number on their first shot. Jason, who was CEO of Caviar, his first company was Groupon for movie tickets, or Groupon for food. And then that one crashed and burned. He got all the contacts and then he repositioned it as a food delivery, Caviar. Maybe some of you guys heard about it. It's like Groupon or Grubhub for like gourmet food. And he sold it for 90 million. But most of his investors, I think all of them, like reinvested in him. And for them, it's worth it because they're like, well, you have all the technology now, you have the same co-founders, you have the same restaurant contacts. Of course, you're going to hit a home run this time. And they can afford having all these misfires, right? And they're only taking anywhere from like 1% to maybe like 20% max of the company. While as a VC or a PE firm, oftentimes you're taking more than 50%, 50, 60, 70, 80% of a buyout. And oftentimes, you'll be in a situation where you will have limited partners that are part of the actual fund, but the actual fund will be solely in charge of raising debt, raising capital, bringing on the new management team. So it's like you can't misfire when you're so deep into this investment. You can't just pay, spray and pay, or spray and pray. Yeah, you can't use that approach when it comes to PE investing. Because VCs focus on highly accelerated growth, they need to target industries that are high-tech focused, right? So you see examples here: technology, biotech, clean tech, all these companies. Surprisingly, a lot of VCs don't stay in the game that long. The lifespan is, something like 5 to 10 years. A lot of VC funds like come and go, and then they'll start new funds. There's also a lot of investors that like they know that their track record is so bad that they just walk around Silicon Valley like pretending like they're investor, but they don't have new capital coming in to invest in more startups. So when you're raising money from an angel or a VC, you want to look at when their last investment was made. And if you look at PitchBook, it'll show you a column called dry powder. And dry powder means how much money they have left in the fund that they could deploy. And if you're a savvy investor, you ask them, how much dry powder do you have for this current fund? And when do you have to release the capital by? Because it's kind of like, let's say you're applying for a job and there's no job openings. You know what I mean? Like you want to know if there's capital to be deployed. So if you're able to ask those questions, you come off as a professional that it's not going to get pushed around. So that's really important to understand. Percentage of the company acquired. So we covered this. Anyone want to answer this real quick? What's the difference?
P&E firms are typically over 50%, so anywhere from like 50 to 80. And then venture capitals, it's a much lower number because they're not looking to be a majority shareholder.
Mm-hmm. How about board seat then? How would this affect board seat? Who gets the board seat for both scenarios? What do you guys think? And why is the board even important? Wait, aren't there a couple people in this class that have their own companies? Who has their own company, like a side business? Or planning to? Do you have a board seat? Do you guys, Puya and Vince?
Actually, it's a family business, but yeah, we have board.
You have a board?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you guys have actual board meetings, or is it just like a formality?
Just formality. Yeah, it's just family business. We decide between the family.
Okay. What about you, Vince?
No, nope, do not.
Oh, okay. I mean, so like family businesses, sometimes startups, they play, very loose with the rules. But imagine if you're managing, right, a $50 million enterprise, right? Then it gets very important when you have numerous shareholders, like who gets the board seat, who gets the vote. There's all these certain rules, like how much should a CEO get paid, or how much should you pay for C-level, etc. So most VC firms, unless they're a lead investor, you're not going to have, a board seat. Maybe the lead investor has like one board seat. PE firms, you're going to have like 3 board seats out of 5. Sometimes like 4. Like you want control. You want to be able to fire the CEO if they screw up. Like there's no way you're going to do a deal with like 1 board seat. You want 2, 3. You want to, power up when you're making that majority buyout. Oftentimes, and I'm being told by my investors, is that like when I'm buying a company, don't even offer the seller a board seat. Use that as a negotiation chip. So yeah, maybe if I acquire a business, maybe there'll be 1 board seat, but like it would be 4 investors on top of that. So board seat is very different in terms of the structure. So VC firms, even the big one, maybe they'll get like 20% of the board seats, but PE funds, it's very proportionate, right? To the actual percentage of the ownership that they have. So it's a very different structure when it comes to these 2 structures. Okay, so what's the next page? Percentage acquired. Yep, so we covered that. What does each investment size look like? So what are your thoughts?
Considering the PE usually buys 100% company, the investments for PE is much more than VC.
Yeah, the check size is just so much bigger, right? Because if you're a PE firm, you have to take down almost that entire like $100 million acquisition, right? VC, you can just invest $1 million, right? So in terms of the check size, it's just significantly greater. You can't mistake in that. So completely different. One's a majority owner, the other one's a minority investor. What does the general structure look like? Well, the structure looks very simple. I'm sure you guys all heard of leverage buyout, right? Leverage buyout is basically when you use debt to make an acquisition. And venture capital, generally because you're investing in companies that are not profitable, you're raising via only equity. You can't even get loans from the bank, generally speaking, because you're not there's no collateral, there's no cash flow, right, to balance off the debt. They're going to be like, how are you going to pay it back? You're not even profitable, basically, right? So startups use only equity the majority of the time, unless they've been profitable for some time, while as PE uses a combination of debt and equity. Trick question, guys. What's more expensive, debt or equity?
Equity.
Why?
Because basically you're giving up ownership. When you raise debt, you don't give up anything. But when you give like ownership, so you are like losing the control of the company. And yeah, I think this is
You're giving away ownership. You're giving away control of the company. And debt, you can always pay it back. You can get debt to pay off debt. But equity, you can't really do that, right? You can buy back shares, but if they don't want to sell it, maybe they'll charge you double to buy back those shares than the initial issuance price. So equity is very risky. You get dilution of your power. If you can always raise debt, try to raise debt. But startups, you really don't have that option. And I've seen founders that sold their companies for 100 million, and then they raised so much equity to get there. They own only like 5% by the time they exit, which is still not bad. But compared to what's published in the news, it's a very different reality. So what does a time horizon look like? So private equity, generally, this is accurate, but also slightly inaccurate at the same time. PE, you will, maybe have a longer time horizon compared to VC. But PE, because you're already a profitable company, you can sell and what they call a recapitalization to another PE firm. So you could do partial exits along the way continuously. So let's say hypothetically, Puya buys a company, and then he raised money from let's say Ahmad and then Vince, right? And then 5 years down the line, he grew the company from like $20 million to $50 million, right? And then Lai comes along with Logan, and they're like, hey, we have this new PE fund, like we want to buy you out, Puya, and we're gonna offer you a $70 million valuation. And then Vince is like, well, I'm not sure. Like, maybe I'll sell some of my shares. And then, Ahmad's like, all right, I'm going to sell all of my shares. So you basically, and then Puya, you're like, yeah, I need to kind of, pay back my Chapman tuition or whatever. Right. And then you restructure and you sell some of your shares directly, right, to the new group. And then you liquidate some of your shares, right? So you have enough cash flow, right? And it's very easily doable, because PE firms, you're operating on the premise that oftentimes that you're buying a profitable business. You're not growing something from seed stage to unicorn stage and waiting for that ginormous exit, like an IPO or going public, right, without having any kind of profitable balance sheet. So that it's a very different world in both scenarios. So the ultimate exit does take longer, but there's a lot of recapitalizations along the way, giving you partial liquidity along your journey. What does compensation look like? This is just kind of like a general overview. I mean, it's just, there's such a wide variance depending on VC and PE. So I'm not going to delve on this too much. But generally speaking, you'll get paid more than 6 figures and then less than 7 figures. But it's all about the carry. Oftentimes, like, do you bring the right businesses to the fund? That's all that matters, really. Like, you get 100,000, but if you're able to pick the next Facebook, Groupon, Google, Tesla, like all these companies, then you're in good shape. And you want to be able to create a track record to be getting the right companies. You don't want to just make it, oh, I made it to VC. Like, nah, dude, that's when your career starts, buddy. It's not where you made it to the top, not at all. Because yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of VCs and PE firms, particularly VCs, they don't stay that long, right? So private equity firms, like, they do buy mature public companies, but of course they buy smaller companies as well. VCs invest mostly in early stage companies. P firms, they buy all across the entire spectrum. VCs focus on tech. Sizes are a little bit different. Generally, PE firms are a lot bigger as well. There's like funds that are, a few $100 billion, like this equity partners, like I just mentioned. So there's a lot of, deals that are happening all the time in the PE space that, people don't know about. Check this out, when you get a chance. I mean, PE definitely had a bad rep back in the 1980s. I'm not sure if you guys read the book, Barbarians at the Gate. It's all about, creating corporate chaos, kicking people out of their own company, and, doing all these like shady ways of getting majority control. So PE had a bad rep, but, companies like KKR, BlackRock, et cetera, they really transformed how PE is done in the modern era. So it's been very, very different. I think there's also going to be a big boom in private equity in the next 10 years, just because there's a lot of baby boomer businesses that are looking for a succession plan. So that's about a $10 trillion market. And they're looking for people that want to take over their business, and specifically looking for tech transformation. So it's going to be very exciting the last 10 years or so. While as I think in venture capital, I think the valuations are going to come down. This is just my speculation. Only because more and more companies are just pretty much going to be tech companies in some way, shape, or form. And there was like like a gold rush towards SaaS software, because with everything going into the cloud, but that's been going on for like 5-10 years. I don't know how much longer that's going to go. So these are just kind of like my early thoughts. Don't don't think it's like correct. It's just my theory. Okay, so let's take a quick break, and then we're just going to go over a couple PE models. So how about we reconvene at 8:05? Would that work? Okay, awesome. You guys are doing great. It's Friday, but you guys are killing it. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, guys, last stretch. Who is ready? Logan, Persia, you still there? Oh, she's back. Vince.
I was eating dinner.
Oh, okay. Very courteous. Puya, at the supermarket? Or is that that's some snacks? Okay. Lai. So what do you guys think? Do you guys do, you know, if you had to pick a career, would you guys rather be a PE investor or a VC investor?
I feel like I'd enjoy PE more personally.
Why, Logan?
Just working on
Well,
working on the companies like that just seems more fun to me. Like obviously, you know, you got to start as an analyst and you can work your way up, but I feel like working one-on-one with the companies like through the PE firm would be a fun job.
any other thoughts?
I would probably go with PE as well because there's more control in PE.
Anyone want
I
to
would say PE as well because it's more stable and safe, I
Okay.
guess.
Gotcha. That's a good reason. By the way, so does anyone know the exit percentage, like a you know, profitable exit in the percentage in the VC world? Anyone want to take a guess?
This
Okay.
might be the crypto market talking, but like I would assume something over 80% would be like their long-term goal. I know that's ridiculous, but like you look at crypto, like I guess investment firms and
No,
they
no, no,
look
no. No, the Logan, the question is what percentage of startups end up selling their company and making all their investors money? Like what percentage as a profitable exit?
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna guess
Oh, no worries.
less than five. Less than five.
Less than 5. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I
Is
would
it
double that and go with 10.
oh okay, so you guys are right on the money together. It's about 7%. Anyone want to make a guess for PE?
30%?
Oh, okay. It's actually higher. So 55%. Yeah,
Oh.
who said 50?
I said 60. but
60. Yeah, yeah, Enrique, you're really close. So 55%. And the good thing is if you end up building a lifestyle business, although you might not be VC fundable, you have a good chance of selling to a PE firm. A lot of the companies that I'm looking at are baby boomer businesses, sometimes built in the 80s and 90s, and they just profitably grew it to 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars per year in revenue over a course of like, you know, 4 decades. Very admirable. And now they're just selling it. They never got VC funding or anything. It was just, you know, they were since ground zero. So, you know, if you guys pursue a lifestyle business and end up selling it, there's a good chance you might sell it to a PE firm. And then you end up working for them with just like one board seat, and then you get fired. Or you don't, right? Because you took this class and you know how to structure a term sheet. Okay, anyways. Okay, so how do you assess companies? Like, you know, in a traditional finance sense, not like negotiations, I'm gonna pay whatever I want style, but like in a traditional sense, how do you value companies? Well, you know, are you guys familiar with this? Looking at trading comp, public traded comps, precedent transactions, DCF models, LBO models. Is this new, or how do you guys feel about these topics?
Some are familiar, others are not.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just talk about this like at a very high level. Yeah, it'll be very intuitive once we get through these slides. So there are 4 primary ways of looking at, you know, valuations. And yes, there is a very wide variance. So it gets really, really tricky when you're talking to, you know, sellers, right? And even when you're raising funds, or even when you're putting in a valuation for a company where you're even just going to, you know, distribute revenues or distribute dividends to people who become an investor, even for your lifestyle business, which you can completely legally do. It is common, especially for, some of, old school entrepreneurs like back in the 80s and 90s. Like that's what they did. They got money from their friends and they said, each quarter I make money, I'm going to give you like 5% of the revenue or something like, or 5% of the EBITDA margin or whatever it was, right? So when you're thinking about valuations, there's several ways to look at it. The first method is like looking at publicly traded companies, and then you look at price to earnings ratios. You look at just like the overall stock price and the market cap. Generally, what happens is that the bigger the company gets, the higher the multiple is for their valuation relative to the EBITDA or their net income or their top line revenue, because it's more stable. And it's also because it's a dominant market player with much stronger pricing control. That's very, very important, because what we talked about earlier, you want, defensibility, you want quality of revenue, and those all factor in. So for example, if there's like an ed tech company that's generating 5 million in revenue, then the multiple on the revenue might only be like 3x. Let's just say it's like an ed tech software, 5 million annual recurring revenue, it'd be like 3x. If they hit 50, this company is not worth $150 million. It's probably going to be worth like 10x, $500 million. And then it just goes crazier and crazier and crazier. And then you only need to check out Chegg right now and then see the, let me just see the market cap and then the revenue. So Chegg is about $12 billion. And then Chegg revenue is $321 million. So they're trading at a like a 30x multiple compared to their top line revenue, whereas I'm trying to pay 2.5x for the same company that I just pitched to you guys, the anonymized company. So you can see the multiple expand. Now this is just kind of like a very basic breakdown. You're obviously going to look at the quality of the revenue, how much of it is recurring, how much is based on consulting fees, how sticky is it. This could be a wide variance where the price of the company could be discounted another 50% or increase another 300%. It's such a black box. But just to give you guys a perspective, that's how they call it the expansion multiplier as the size of the company increases. The other thing that you look at is precedent transactions, right? Like how many deals were in this space and what was the multiple? What was the price relative to the revenue? What was the price relative to the EBITDA? You look at these metrics to come up with the median, like an average. So Elena is going to probably go over this in more detail tomorrow, looking at some publicly traded companies. And we extrapolate some of the multiples for publicly traded companies, and then we come up with a median number. So our valuations are always higher than what we want to pay, because publicly traded companies are bigger, so their multiples are a lot higher. And think about what kind of companies get on the news. You're not going to see on TechCrunch companies that were sold for like $200,000, right? The bigger the company, the more newsflash it is, the better the product. It's going to have all the transactions, right, that are available publicly, right? So basically what ends up happening is that there's some kind of survivorship bias is what in terms of what you see on the news versus like all the transactions, because a lot of transactions, it's very, very difficult to find those numbers. So you have publicly traded companies, you have precedent transactions, and then you have the whole like DCF model, right? Where you're discounting future cash flows into the present value using a discount rate, and then finding out, what the valuation would be, and then adding a terminal value, right? Usually after the growth ends, you add like a perpetual, growth rate, and then it's like you're done for the day. You add up all the cash flows to X amount of years, and then you come up with the current valuation of the company. And then the leverage buyout model is kind of like a DCF model, but you're also infusing a debt component, and you're trying to project how much you can grow, incorporating debt to your financing strategy. So these are all the 4 different metrics. Usually there is no right or wrong. This is supposed to give you a proxy for what the company should be valued at. So when you're going through these models, as an analyst or an associate, these are the things that you need to do, and then present to your, vice president and the managing partner. Then the managing partner says, "Screw this. I'm going to pay what I'm going to pay." So that's kind of like, what happens, because it's at the end of the day, it's just getting two parties to agree. But what ends up happening is that the larger the size of the deal, you can't do that. Doesn't work. You can't really pull those moves off as frequently as you want to. But this is why a lot of analysts get paid the bucks that they do. They come up with all these metrics, they come up with all the correct assumptions, and then oftentimes, they'll do what's called a blend. So they'll maybe use two or three metrics, and then point the ranges out, and then recommend, right, to the investment team, investment committee, hey, publicly traded comps is telling me this company's worth 200 million, but looking at the precedent transactions, it's 400 million. But I studied the cash flows; it doesn't look that good. I don't think we should pay more than 150. But if you look at a leverage buyout scenario, our upside is really big. Hence, I came up with this like medium amount, which is about $300 million for this company, right? So that's kind of like how you would present to an investment committee, oftentimes by using at two or three different one of these scenarios to come up with um, to assess. Okay, so let's just talk about some pros and cons. Like, what would be some, pros and cons? Yeah, what are some pros and cons of looking at publicly traded companies from, overview that I just provided?
Well, information is relatively available for like public companies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so
Access to data. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and on the other hand, for like private companies, you cannot like find information and data like easily.
That is correct. What else?
I feel like a con for public companies is there's a lot of regulatory rules you have to follow, especially with the government. I'm sure there are some more rules with private firms as well. However, there are probably more regulations.
So so what does regulations have to do with trying to figure out company valuations?
Um, it probably takes longer to do all the paperwork and whatnot. As with
Okay.
as with a private one, the executive probably say yes, we're selling, negotiate, done deal.
Okay, gotcha. What are some other pros and cons of comparing publicly traded companies' valuations to assess a private company? What are some cons, like major cons?
So for public companies, they are like highly liquid. You can like cash out, you can sell your shares, but in private companies, you cannot like liquid your company easily.
I like that. So the liquidity gives you more transparency, right, on the deals, like the frequency of it. What about, have you guys ever thought about like, well, what if, right, someone came up with a completely new industry, right? Like Facebook. How do you come up with the comparison of Facebook's valuation when they try to IPO? I think something at like $20 billion. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was upwards of $10 billion. Like, is there a good publicly traded company that you can assess when like they literally, invented monetization on social media? Difficult, right? You could take pieces here and there, very difficult, right? But if another Tesla were to IPO, you have a Tesla as a precedent, right? Like Neo is compared to Tesla, right? So that's like one of the big problems. It's in the VC space or certain disruptive companies, it's so hard to come up with a publicly traded comparison, like Airbnb, right? You take bits and pieces from the hotel industry, but like, dude, what the heck is this? Like, what is this idea? It's so weird. So there are certain limitations when you're looking at public comps. But yes, it is kind of like the short way to do a quick litmus test on figuring out, valuations are solid or not, right? So the accessibility makes it pretty easy, but it does come up with its limitations. Multiple data points, like you mentioned, Puya, real-time data. Difficult to find perfect comps, right? Given large, multifaceted companies don't compare well to small private businesses. So sometimes even the size comparison, because of the multiple differentiator, might make it very difficult and irrelevant because the size gap is so huge. It's like, what expansion multiplier, do we use to assess this? Okay, what about pros and cons of looking at public precedent transactions? So looking at historical, acquisition prices, what are some, pros and cons of this?
But one of the pros would be you don't have to do the calculations yourself. It's already someone already did before.
I like how you're thinking. What else? And it's proven, right? So it's like your boss can't fire you. It's like, dude, like this transaction happened a year ago. Like, why are you mad at me? What else?
The transparency again, I believe here is important for like public companies.
Transparency. Okay.
Yeah.
Access to data, very similar, right? What about like in weird situations, right? Like all of a sudden there's like a disruption, right? Like a Zoom happened, right? Like you can't compare, for example, like WebEx and if WebEx, I don't know if WebEx is part of Cisco, I don't know what their valuation is, or Skype, right? You can't really compare that if there's large tectonic shifts that happen, right? Globally and industry wide, right? So that could definitely throw a curveball in terms of looking at publicly traded companies. There's also markets that are very, very illiquid. Like I was in the movie ticketing space. Like the last buyout happened in 2007 when Fandango was bought by Comcast. And every time we talked to an investor for like 10 years, I had to talk about that. Like, all right, so like you get your exit probability is so low. If there's like one acquisition every like 15 years, like why would I invest here? It makes it very, very difficult because certain markets there's just not enough M&A that happens. But on the flip side, yeah, it gives you a really good benchmark, being able to compare and look at the multiples, etc. So, these are some pros and cons. Can be more, similar to a target company and more useful as a result. Advantages, clear buyout multiples. Yeah, sometimes transaction sizes are rarely disclosed in the private market. If you're only looking at the private market, that's difficult. I just don't know why. Like if you sell, like you should, I don't know why people make it so secretive, but even for like decent size exits, people are very secretive about it. More than I think they, should be. So yeah, sometimes it's outdated too. Maybe there's a lot of M&A activity like 5 years ago, and the markets because of COVID could have shifted considerably. So that's another thing to think of. And of course, like it could be hard to find perfect comps for target companies because if it's like a new industry, new disruptive technology, how do you benchmark that? So that could be another challenge as well. Okay, what are some pros and cons of looking at the DCF model?
You have the pros is you have a pretty good understanding of the cash flow of the company and whether or not they are able to maintain. And then a con would be what if it's a relatively new company and so they don't have the historical data for like they started last year, then they won't have the cash flow of the previous years.
Yep, very difficult to make projections, right? If it's a new company. What else?
So it's more about opinion and your point of view when it's about DCF. So someone can like predict the cash flow growth like at a, I don't know, 20% rate. Another person can say that it's gonna be 5%. Again, in like all matters, in VAC, in everything, there's problems. So for example, in private equity, you cannot like come with a good weighted average cost of capital, because of the limitations that the model has. Yeah.
And the problem with the DCF model, and I'm just going to slip into the next slide. The problem with the DCF model is that I see this so often with financial analysts coming from Chicago, where it's like so many guys like love to do finance, and they don't understand tech. So when they're building out their assumptions and it's a tech product, oh my God, it's so bad. Like in terms of understanding sales cycles or turnaround periods, why churn is important, and that you have to build that into. The financial model has to tell a story about the company, its strength, how it allocates its, resources. So it should permeate through the whole thing. But if you don't understand the company in itself, it's so hard to build a model. So when I often say, financial analysts just do a DCF model, you could really go off the rails based on the subjectivity. It just gets ridiculous. Some of the assumptions that they make. So that's like, for me, that's very, very dangerous. A DCF model on its own, I think, is very, very weak. This is also my opinion, by the way. Now, 20, 30 years ago, when there was less disruptive technology, I think it would have been pretty forward. Like a lot of companies had very straightforward operations or simpler operations. It could have stood on its own. But I think because of the way technology has changed the game, this could be very dangerous if you're only doing a DCF model. So you have to probably do it with conjunction, build out your assumptions, and really dig into the numbers and whatnot. Okay, let's talk about what are some pros and cons of. Oh, wait, did we just do that? Okay. Factors that might contribute to higher or lower valuations. So these are just some of the things that might, make the valuation higher. You remember, it's always a range, right? So quality of revenues, right? You want long-term sticky customer concentration, recurring revenue, low customer concentration. You don't want all your revenues coming from like one customer that provides 80%, because if they cancel, your revenue is going to be done. Like it's going to be reduced by 80%. Large addressable market. We talked about, earlier, like that SIM, they were just doing a CRM tool, but for student enrollment, it wasn't really ed tech. It was significantly smaller. Competitive advantage, like having that, what Warren Buffett likes to call moat, right? Is it defensible? Like, do you actually provide a sustainable value add? Market leadership and strong management team. Those are just also really important things. Businesses having unappealing characteristics, this could drive the valuation lower. So very similar, it's just like kind of the opposite, like one-time project-based revenue. You have to work every single time to earn that project. Very tiring. Low margins, high capex, high working capital. Cyclicality, it could be really annoying, or seasonality even. Like you don't want bumpy revenue cycles that could put a dent on cash flow. Then you can't get loans. It might also be an issue with operations, like hiring seasonal workers, or getting cash flow that's inconsistent from customers. That could all create additional risk. High regulatory risk, that's also very, very important, because sometimes there's just no defense for that in certain industries. Weak management team, you don't want that. Volatile commodity exposure, even if it's something's like currency related. Like, it's so funny. So deal number one was a Canadian, or the deal that I mentioned about with the SIM. It was actually the first deal that we looked at, and they're based in Canada, and the US dollar was going down. So the company's valuation was going up as you're in negotiation. So that was really funny. So those are all the factors that could, impact the way that valuations could be affected. And there's multiple ways, right, that a deal can be structured in the private equity space. So normally in the VC space, very simple. You get, cash, then you give away percentage of your company. There's no debt involved. But in a PE fund, normally you're working with the seller to structure a deal that makes sense so that they capture the upside, as well as, get some liquidity in the short term. So you can structure it while you get seller rollover equity, meaning that, the seller gets paid X% each year until you pay the total value of the company. You can get senior debt, mezzanine debt, which is a little bit more riskier. You could also do what do you call it? Earnout, right? So if you work together with a seller and then you're able to hit certain milestones, the seller would get bonuses along the way. So in the private equity world, there's something called TEV, total enterprise value, the collective aggregate of getting cash upfront, debt, seller rollover equity, seller debt, all that stuff aggregates into the total transaction price. So these are different options in your arsenal you would use to structure a deal, which is very different in the VC space because you don't really have this kind of financing flexibility because you can't get debt and you can't say I can pay you back, right? In the startup world, it's like, dude, you're not profitable. How are you going to pay me back, right? So it just doesn't work that way in startup land. So this is a breakdown of some of the different terminologies that I think would really help you guys understand in terms of how a PE deal is structured. Just go through it. So revolver is just short-term like credit card type of loan. Mezzanine debt is a subordinate debt, normally like a little bit higher interest rate than senior debt, where a bank was willing to take a little bit more risk on you because you just need a little bit more money. Think about it that way. Unitrans debt represents like a hybrid loan where you're using a structure in which you use senior debt and subordinate debt into one loan. And earnout is like a bonus structure that sellers could get if aggregate as a team you hit certain milestones, because oftentimes you don't replace the whole entire management team. You might bring 2 out of the 3 or 1 out of 3 or 1 out of the 5. So in those scenarios where the management stays on board, you could sweeten the package by providing these bonus incentives. So they work hard with the new management team as well, and the company doesn't collapse because no one knows what they're doing. There's also seller paper in which you can pay back the seller over X amount of time with the money that you make together, and then rollover equity, meaning that the seller can keep anywhere from like 1% of the company up to like maybe 30%. So they're still part of the new management team post acquisition. Am I going too fast? Is this confusing? It's a lot, right? No? Okay, we're good. Okay. So sample of a PE model. So this is just kind of a simple breakdown on, this like a small deal, $18 million deal. So this is like consideration at close. You're paying 15 million in cash, $3 million in earnout. So the total enterprise value is $18 million for a small acquisition. And these are just additional ways of how deals could be structured as a percentage of the funding that's provided. So sometimes you're going to use more debt, sometimes more equity, sometimes more seller rollover equity. So these are these sellers usually just care about like the total exit price, and then there's certain, I guess, make or break terms that could really kill the deal. But generally speaking, like if you talk to the seller, they're going to be comfortable with getting paid afterwards if the exit price is a lot higher. So people who are really good in private equity, even though they're not paying the most, they're able to structure deals in a way that maximizes satisfaction for the seller. So I like to say, like, I don't care about the price. I care about the value. So I say, I pay half the price and I double the value, right? As a joke, but I kind of mean it at the same time, because if you really understand what that person wants, and usually they do want some kind of exit plan, but they want, enough liquidity now and another point of liquidity later, because they're not going to spend all $20 million at once. So if you could take different time horizons, right, and just tranche it out through a combination of seller paper, seller rollover equity, and like, an earnout clause, hey, you probably might make more money in the long run if the new management team could actually like hit the ground running and really elevate your company to the next level. So if you're able to, really understand these situations, it doesn't really come down to, doing a, DCF model and convincing the seller, hey, you're worth this much. Just really understanding like how they're motivated goes a long way. So this is very similar. Just another breakdown of different, loans and how you can structure a deal. and just another deeper look. We're not going to get too into this. You can just kind of, I'm posting notes up, just take a look whenever you get a chance. Yeah, in general, it's pretty intricate in terms of, you know, how you can structure deals in private equity versus VC. Okay, with that note, class is over. We covered a lot today: PE, VC, and, you know, deal structuring, deal valuations. Tomorrow, before tomorrow's class, make sure to get a good understanding of TAM, SAM, and SUM. There's videos there, and then there's the Uber one, and then you guys have the homework for tonight. Oh my God, I'm totally ruining your summers. And then we're gonna have a guest speaker that's gonna go over some financial modeling. You know, Elena, who's a dear friend of mine and CFO. And then we're gonna, you know, if you have a chance, just you know, look at the spreadsheet, just get familiar with it so you don't freak out tomorrow. But it'll have a lot of the topics that we discussed today. So I'll stick around for a few minutes for anyone who has any questions. But if not, I hope you enjoy what remains of your Friday.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank
See
you,
you
Professor.
tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow, guys.
Thank you. Also, I just want to mention that I believe Chapman's changing their graduation until 9 a.m.